Good morning, everyone. On behalf of WWF India and CII and the READY program, I welcome you all for this webinar on virtual power purchase agreements for corporate power procurement in India. We will begin in a minute at the most, just waiting for a couple of more attendees to join, and then we'll start. Thank you. So once again, a very good morning to all of you, and I would like to thank each one of you for taking time to join us this busy morning for this important topic on virtual power purchase agreements. I'd like to extend my gratitude to our distinguished speakers today, Mr. Patrick Leonard, who joins us from Amazon, Seattle. He's based out of Seattle, US, and Mr. Pinaki Bhattacharya, who's the CEO of AMP Energy, AMP Solar here in India, AMP Energy India, who joins us today for sharing their insights on the virtual power purchase agreements for corporate power procurement in India. I'll quickly take 2 to 3 minutes to introduce the READY program under which we are doing this webinar today, and then I'll hand it over to our speakers for the day who will take us through their insights on virtual power purchase agreements. One from the international perspective, where Patrick will talk about Amazon's experience in VPPAs in the US and also some of the other insights that he has. And Mr. Pinaki will also talk about some of the broader context and also how we can look at adopting virtual power purchase agreements as a bigger or as an alternate route for corporate power procurement in India. As many of you are already aware, we run this initiative called Renewable Energy Demand Enhancement Ready, and we have 30 plus corporate groups, both Indian and multinationals, who are a part of the Ready program. We started way back in 2018, and we have all the various big industrial groups with a number of 30 plus, with an aggregate demand, electricity demand of 18 gigawatt, who are on board this platform. And Ready is basically a platform for CNI consumers to look at enhancing the uptake of renewable energy and also catalyzing solutions to address the challenges which are restricting demand in India. We have four buyers principles for Ready, looking at four key areas which needed to be looked at from a corporate buyer's perspective, what they need from the system. And that's what we've based our entire program on, looking at the long-term policy and regulatory stability, enabling greater choice for CNI consumers to procure renewable energy, and also build their capacity in the process, enhance the uptake of renewable energy, and also ensuring that there is availability of low-risk firm power at competitive prices. The Ready program has been working on all these four, on in the areas of all these four pillars that we've set for ourselves, and we've been working very focused. We have a large focus on policy advocacy, where we've been working with Ministry of New and Renewable Energy on bringing about some changes in the current policy and regulatory regime. We've had multiple interactions with the ministry, and we've made recommendations on the various provisions that need to be amended, and also how there can be more choice for CNI consumers to procure renewable energy. And this webinar is also a step in that direction, where we are disseminating information on virtual power purchase agreements as another alternative and a very successful mode in globally to procure renewable energy. Just giving a brief background of how we began, we did a comprehensive survey of the Indian market. where we reviewed the NSE top 100 companies and also ran a primary survey with 40 big industrial enterprises to ascertain the trends, sustainability trends, and also the corporate RE procurement trends. And we found that almost 70% of the companies were procuring RE in some form. And several companies also had international commitments, such as they had signed up for science-based targets, and 5 companies out of the NSE top 100 also had 100% RE targets, and they committed to RE 100. Also, they have internal targets on GHG reduction and RE targets as well. The most important, I'd say, finding of our study and our primary and secondary survey was that the respondents highlighted policy and regulatory issues as a major challenge, which were restricting the uptake of RE. And that's how we designed our buyers principles, where policy advocacy became one of the key pillars to focus our energies and to strategize around it to enable the uptake of corporate renewables. Coming to this important topic, why we've assembled here on alternative corporate renewable power models and why it's needed. Just a brief background on where we stand on power procurement by corporates in India. Corporates account for almost 51% of the total electricity consumption, and it is also estimated that it's going to go up by another 66% by 2030. But if you look at the renewable power share out of this total share, it's only 3.2%, a meager 3%, which is very, very low compared to the potential that the sector has. And also, if we look at the RE procurement options which exist currently for the CNI consumers in India, we just have 3 options where consumers can either go for on-site solar, that's primarily rooftop solar, or off-site open access wind and solar, or RECs. So these are the only 3 procurement modes which are available. And as a result of that, and as a result of the various analysis and researches that we've been doing under the READY program, we zeroed down on the idea of exploring other alternative corporate power procurement models which are being utilized and which are thriving in other economies such as the US, UK, Australia. And we did some analysis and we found that there were other modes such as green tariffs, virtual power purchase agreements, dedicated renewable energy exchange, and IREX, which were also being utilized globally, and they have potential in India. So we carried out this research and we launched our report in December 2019 based on our research, where we zeroed down on 5 models, looking at green tariffs, VPPAs, RECs, IREX, peer-to-peer trading, and also the dedicated renewable energy exchange. And we examined the suitability of these models for the Indian market, and we made preliminary suggestions for their introduction to the government. And as a result of the launch of this report, we were invited by the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy to conduct a stakeholder consultation, which was chaired by the Secretary MNRE at that time, and it was in February 2020. And as a result of that, there have been rigorous advocacy efforts which have been going on. And the ministry is very, very keen to explore these alternative models, especially virtual power purchase agreements and the green tariffs. I am just briefly going to touch down upon the virtual power purchase agreements, what they are, and then I'll leave it to Patrick and Pinaki, who are going to take us through the detailed, who are going to dive deep into the VPPAs and give us a broader idea or on how they work in the other countries and how we can make them work in India. So basically, a VPPA is a derivative contract. It's also called a contract for difference, where consumer agrees to buy specified power from a developer at a fixed price, which is also known as strike price, for a fixed duration. And the power is traded on the exchange at the prevailing market price. And there is also a provision in which RECs are transferred from the developer to the consumer. And this model is currently being used in Australia, US, and UK. And there are several routes through which this can be done. There can be a one-way PPA, there can be a two-way PPA. And I'll let Patrick and Pinaki talk about that. And I'll quickly now, I've just introduced what a virtual power purchase agreement is. And we'll just give you a brief analysis according to our report, what we've concluded on the virtual power purchase agreements. In terms of growth potential, we see a medium good growth potential in the current times, and which has a very high, it will become very high in next 3 to 5 years. So it has a good potential as far as growth is concerned. If we look at the cost of power, how that will be impacted, if we go in for virtual power purchase agreements, there is no change in cost of power. So there is no financial implication as such if CNI consumers resort to VPPAs. Looking at regulatory and policy effort, which is very, very important from an Indian standpoint. So there are no changes as such which are required as long as it remains a bilateral contract between a developer and a CNI consumer. And also, it's very, very ideal for large consumers, medium to large consumers who have huge electricity footprint, and they can easily go in for this. And there is no boundary of any, there is no intrastate boundary, and the power can be purchased from anywhere in India. There are all such restrictions can be done away with if VPPAs are enabled in India as an alternative power procurement model. So quickly, I'll hand it over to Patrick, Mr. Patrick Leonard, who is a senior manager for renewable energy procurement team for Amazon, and he's based out of Seattle, US. Quickly, Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Varun. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with us today. I'm looking forward to the questions later. I have been working in renewable energy procurement now for about 8 years for a number of different corporates, T-Mobile, Starbucks, and most recently at Amazon. And I lead our worldwide consumer renewable energy team. So help procure renewable energy across the world for our operations. And we have a goal to be net zero carbon across our entire worldwide operations by 2040. And our first milestone on that journey is to be 100% renewable energy globally by 2025. So that's our short-term target. Pinaki, would you like to introduce yourself as well, and then I can present my material?
Sure. So just give me. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. And I don't know if people have joined from any other time zone. So yeah, this is Pinaki, and I lead AMP Energy India, and this is a global IPP. And I'll talk a little bit more about ourselves. And I will basically talk in terms of our practitioner standpoint, from a developer standpoint, the opportunities for VPPs, and what are the few hurdles that we need to cross as a sort of as a group. And maybe I will talk a little bit more about myself and the company when we talk about when we go through our presentation. Thanks, Patrick.
Very good, thank you. So today you'll hear
Yeah.
both the buyer side, where I come from, and then also the seller side, where Pinaki and his company operate, and how together we can grow renewable energy. So Varun, maybe you could present the on what the virtual power purchase agreement mechanism is. So essentially, this is a contract for renewable energy certificates or environmental attributes. That's what the buyer is trying to achieve. Many corporates and large buyers have renewable energy goals. In some countries, municipalities have goals, cities have goals, states have goals, as well as corporate buyers like an Amazon or a large C&I customer. And so what we're trying to get from the transaction is more renewable energy onto the grid, and an attribute that we can use to demonstrate that we're meeting our renewable energy commitment. So essentially, we're interested in the gray line there labeled REX, the renewable energy certificate, and that transfers the environmental benefit of the megawatt hours produced, the solar units or the wind units from the project. We get to claim that as a comparison to our own electricity usage. And then in return, we provide a fixed price to the project developer. And there are a number of ways you can achieve the fixed price, but generally in the contracts I work on, it's either a fixed price over the term. So for example, we might spend $30 US for every megawatt hour produced for 15 years. Or it can be indexed. So maybe it's $25 with 2% inflation every year over the term of the contract. So there's some examples of the fixed price. And then each month or each settlement period, the seller compares our fixed price against the market price for power, and we net the difference. So if the average price in the market was $40, then I pay the developer $10 multiplied by the output, multiplied by the megawatt hours produced. Inversely, if the market price was $20 for the month, then the transaction works in the reverse. And so it's in a simple form, a bilateral transaction between the person generating the energy and the person buying the environmental attributes. Of course, the developer is actually selling physical power into the grid. So that's the left-hand portion of the graphic. And we are still also buying physical power from the grid. So that's our utility payment in the bottom right. So these contracts don't replace our electricity contract with the utility. And many corporates are working with utilities to grow renewable energy in addition to virtual power purchase agreements. So at its heart, a VPPA is a contract between the power producer and the off-taker, where the underlying electricity is not transferred to the buyer, but settled under this contract for difference mechanism, where there's a fixed price or a strike price and a market reference price. The ideal scenario for the power producer or for the developer is that long-term fixed price is sufficient for them to go out and obtain project financing, ultimately without any other public subsidy. So this is a way for large buyers, large C&I customers to procure renewable energy without burdening other market participants. So for Amazon, we're very customer centric. It would be unfair for us to raise the price of electricity for the average residential customer, the average household consumer. We would rather pay for the renewable energy we consume ourselves. And the VPPA is one mechanism where we can do that through a bilateral transaction. It also helps to bring more renewable energy onto the grid, into the wholesale market, than a utility or a government target alone would, because to a developer or a seller, you're now providing multiple different types of customers that can interact in the marketplace. And so ultimately, if I have a goal and the government entity or the utility has a goal, now there are two goals in the marketplace. And as more C&I customers want to procure, that volume increases. And as we send a demand signal to the market, developers will provide supply and build more renewable energy to meet that demand. So virtual power purchase agreements are not designed to replace or eliminate transactions with utilities and with government entities. They're intended to supplement. And some of the key benefits that they provide is volume without geographic restrictions. So in terms of Amazon's footprint, we operate in more than 8 states in India currently. Each state has its own rules and regulations in the power market, and virtual power purchase agreements allow us to provide a large volume of renewable energy without any one state's restrictions limiting our appetite to get to 100% renewable energy. Equally, there are some countries globally where we're not allowed to buy renewable energy yet due to regulation. And this allows us to buy in one country to supplement another country, an approach where we might take if we only have 1 or 2 sites in a country, obviously less relevant in India where we have a large footprint. And then finally, it allows us to decarbonize quickly. So what we found across the globe is many governments have ambitious targets to reach 100% renewable energy over many decades. It takes large structural persistent change in the electricity market to get there at a country scale. However, a corporate entity may be able to move much faster. And so to Amazon being able to transact at scale quickly with trusted partners on the developer side allows us to get to 100% renewable energy for our own operations sooner than the overall grid would get there. And obviously, the more buyers like Amazon there are transacting in the market, the quicker the grid as a whole accelerates towards renewable energy. A specific example would be that in the US, the current forecast is that about 20% of renewable energy deployment currently is on behalf of corporate buyers. So contrast that to Varun's introduction that about 2% of renewable energy in India is currently being purchased by corporates. There's clearly an opportunity to accelerate renewable energy deployment. And then finally, another advantage is that it diversifies the customer base for developers. So in many markets where there are compliance goals, where utilities or government entities are required to meet a certain percentage of renewable energy in their supply mix, corporates participating in those same markets don't necessarily compete because we offer different terms. We have a different credit rating to the seller. We will pay a different price than certain other sellers. Many government or utility type customers are interested in very long-term contracts. We're interested in medium long-term contracts. So to a developer, having a diverse set of customers is obviously beneficial for their risk tolerance. And so this is another mechanism that allows more people to transact in the marketplace. So we've covered what the transaction structure is and then what some of the benefits have been in other countries. I think I'd like to finish with a few comments on what we see as key enablers of renewable energy power purchase agreements like those that I've mentioned in India. We think first, one of the challenges that Varun mentioned was open access. So having open access limitations really caps the amount of renewable energy we can buy directly for our operations in India to somewhere around 30% of our total electricity use, based on obviously the states we operate in and the relative size of our operations in each. So a virtual power purchase agreement mechanism would allow us to scale to meet the additional about 70% of our demand. Again, we measure our renewable energy percentage on an annual basis. So net over a year, we're trying to meet our global electricity use with renewable energy through a number of different contract structures, including virtual power purchase agreement. When you look at banking restrictions, this creates a challenge. So for people who are aspiring to run their operations for most hours through 100% renewable energy, we're obviously constrained the shorter the banking period of renewable energy that we face in different states. We're also looking for clarity in regulation around the treatment of virtual power purchase agreement as a derivative. Many corporate buyers have challenges with the way their accounting systems work if VPPAs become derivatives. And so we have to be very clear with our internal financial controls whether a VPPA is treated as a derivative in countries that we operate in. And so that clarity from the regulators is going to be increasingly important over time in India as more CNI customers would like to use this transaction. And the final idea that we would like to work on with Ready is also the bilateral transfer of attributes. So as we mentioned in many countries, buyers and sellers are really transacting for the environmental attribute or for the REC, the renewable energy certificate. There are a number of different ways these can be delivered to customers, and often we see a registry where attributes were originally registered um, for government entities becoming available to voluntary customers like CNI who've set their own renewable energy targets, as well as procurers who are doing this for compliance reasons. So for example, in the US, there are a number of different state level, electricity market level, and regional renewable energy attribute platforms where the attributes are minted or created and then ultimately retired to document renewable energy claims. And these are used both by power producers, by compliance entities, and also by voluntary customers such as Amazon. And so typically we look to take the environmental benefit from the projects directly that we contract. We like to tell our customers about those projects. We like to name the projects. We like to highlight where they are and what benefits they're bringing to the communities where they're located. And so our goal is to be able to provide our customers with transparency to how we're buying our renewable energy, who we're buying it from, and ultimately that we're retiring renewable energy certificates directly from specific projects against our own electricity use. So I will pause for now and perhaps cover some more specific examples later in the conversation.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you for your insights, and I'll hand it over to Mr. Pinaki Bhattacharya now to take us through his presentation. Pinaki, I'll share your slides.
Okay. Thank you. So actually, Patrick covered a lot of points anyway, so it's going to make my task easier.
Yeah.
So,
You can go ahead, Pinaki.
yeah. So I will actually start with a little bit about AMP, because I mean, it's not Amazon that everybody knows Amazon, including like all the people in the conference. So AMP Energy Group was basically headquartered in Canada, started around 12 years back, and gradually we focus in the largest renewable energy markets in the world. That is primarily North America, India, Australia, Japan, and now Spain and UK. And overall it's a large platform with multiple resources, that is solar, wind, battery storage, and flexible response, and we have been growing very steadily, nearly a 2 gigawatt portfolio now, and growing to and adding another 3 gigawatts of generation and 2.2 gigawatts of storage assets. uh, let's move to the next slide. In India, I mean, we are very sort of, we have been in India for the last 4 years or so, and we have a full-fledged base in India, nearly a gigawatt plus platform, and 45 watts. And our focus has been to be a clear triple play. That is, we provide CNI customers with both on-site solutions and off-site solutions, as well as we supply power directly to the utilities also. So that's what we do. So we understand both the markets, that is the utility market as well as the CNI market, and the VPPAs actually fall in the cross section of the two markets. So we are gradually growing to a 3 gigawatt portfolio in India, and we are pan India. We are in like 15 states in the country, because many CNI customers like Amazon and all are in multiple states. The important thing is to deliver a solution in multiple states. And also the customers, apart from the data centers, which we see a huge demand today, on the CNI customer side, there is cement and steel has huge demand, then FMCG companies, auto ancillaries, pharma demand is increasing. So we have customers across all these other different segments, and what we gradually observe is that mostly we are able to replace around 40 to 50 and maybe 60% of their energy with renewables through our own assets. But there is always this gap that remains, essentially, which is because there is no interstate open access, and the VPP framework has to be worked upon. So let's move to the next slide. So Varun, can you move to the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So and this data was already covered by the WWF presentation. So The globally, because since we have presence in different countries, we see huge uptake in terms of corporate PPAs. As far as India is concerned, the percentage is really low, and we see India can have a potential of at least 25 to 50 gigawatts of CNI like projects in the country, because I mean the customers are CNI customers, as you rightly pointed out, consume almost 50% of the country's energy generation. But now what is happening is that there is a sort of a competition between us and the discoms to provide the electricity to the corporates. And one thing we continuously try to explain to the stakeholders in the government through various forums is that see, we need to coexist. And first of all, for a corporate buyer to procure green energy, they would prefer direct procurement, because if it is through the utility, it may not count towards their green energy targets, because our business model is that one model, that is we are selling to the discom and the discom sells to the CNI. We are doing that. The other model, we are selling directly to the CNI customers. So that is what counts towards meeting their RE targets, and that also today reduces their operating costs. So in a free market environment, it cannot be restricted, because if you follow the laws to the letter, as per the open access regulations, it cannot be restricted. But then there are certain states which do restrict it through various mechanisms, but there are certain progressive states also. But the basic point that we are trying to make to the government is that 175 gigawatt is our target in India, and today we are at the halfway mark. So there's a lot to be done in the next couple of years, and you cannot have a situation where everything is sort of only bought by the discoms and there is a long term PPA market. There has to be innovative mechanism like VPPAs or CNI sort of PPAs that can plug the target. For example, we had a 40 gigawatt target just for rooftop power plants. Now all of us know that that kind of 40 gigawatt rooftop is not possible. So our pitch is also to tell the government, why didn't you change it to a CNI target, that 40 gigawatt? And there is enough demand to create that 40 gigawatt rollout in India. So we see this is a huge market opportunity, and as far as corporate PPAs are concerned. Next slide. So in terms of, as Patrick was also pointing out, globally, I mean, we are seeing this is the one of the biggest methods for the basically for the corporate PPAs is the VPPAs. So in India, primarily, if you see, most of the power plants are sort of getting added through the long-term bidding route, and just 3% is through CNI. And for 100% penetration, as I was saying, you need this tool, this method. And the CFD mechanism, as explained in this graph, is basically it's a cash for difference. And I have a next slide to explain that in more detail, and it's already been explained by you. But I would say India can become a not only a largest corporate PPA market, but within that, the VPP can be the biggest component, and with a minimal change, and it can be really a win-win solution. That's why we should really push hard for it. Let's go to the next slide. So this mechanism is that I've just changed the names to actual things as far as India is concerned. So basically, we sign an agreement, let's say, with somebody like an Amazon for a long term, because for financing you need a long term contract, because in India a merchant power plant with a short term contract, you cannot get the debt financing done, because the debt financing market works on a long term. Okay. And second point is that essentially what we do is that based on that contract, we set up a power plant, we sell the power to the exchange, and essentially whatever we derive in the exchange, the difference essentially between the VPPA price and the wholesale price is the settlement, and that is what is sort of is written in the contract. And whatever environmental attributes we generate, okay, for example IREX in this case, we can give that to basically a customer like Amazon, or whoever it is, essentially. So what happens is that so basically customer is not buying the electricity, we are actually selling the electricity into the Indian grid, but the counterparty gets the environmental attributes. So that is what the beauty of this mechanism is. And if you go to the next slide, actually I think so India is And it's also, by the way, a win-win solution. First of all, the corporate RE targets are met because it's because they get the IREX. Second is that it adds to the deployment of renewable energy in the country. Okay, because you cannot do 175 gigawatt just by selling to the utilities. And the third is that the often the main sort of issue is that the discom sees us as a competitor. In this case, there is no reduction on the power purchase from the discom, so the discom also sort of doesn't lose. So I think so this can be something really a win-win solution from for all the three stakeholders: the government, the seller, and the buyer. Next slide. So also see now, I mean, global corporates can choose so many countries for VPPA, but I think so India is really one of the best markets for rolling out VPPAs because we have one of the lowest cost of generation in the country. Okay, and also if you see and there is the power trading market is also getting deeper and deeper. It's 10 to 15 gigawatts a year. And what is happening is that mostly the price is derived by the thermal power. Okay, that is the cost is driven by the thermal power. So what happens, for example, in this graph is, let's say we're trying to demonstrate like a CFD contract cash neutrality is maintained at around 3 rupees 40 paisa. So what it does is that first of all, the price at which the CFD contract can be priced is quite competitive, number one. Number two, what happens is that if you see the exchange price, I mean, the customer will be really happy that the net difference is zero. Okay, so what we are trying to solve for is that can we create a CFD contract in which in the long term the net payment by, let's say, somebody like an Amazon is zero. So essentially you are getting environmental attributes for free, what you would have bought for $25 essentially. And that kind of arbitrage is actually possible in India because you have this we have huge because there is so much of resource in India as far as the renewable energy is concerned, and the cost of generation is lower in India. So that actually provides a potential to create a net zero contract over a long run. So that's the unique sort of aspect about India. And the second is the scale. Because we are seeing other markets like Australia, North America, all nowhere you see like gigawatt scale RFPs getting bidded every month. So the scale is huge. So I believe India can be a really, really big VPPA market. Next. So in terms of us, how we are actually from a like a generator standpoint, how we are actually preparing for it, and essentially we see is basically the idea is to create a one-stop solution to take many of the corporates which are, for example, part of WWF and all, to meet an RE100 target. So if you see, there are four steps essentially. So the first is the on-site, the second is off-site, which is intrastate, that is within the state, the open access. Okay, so these two methods, I think so, Varun, that you pointed out also in your slide, is possible. Okay, although there are restrictions, but we are able to get through it. The bigger chunks are actually interstate open access and VPPA. Interstate open access and VPPA essentially is basically power plants connected to the CTU, the central transmission utility, that is the PGCL substations, the ISTS substations. Okay, so that if and there are certain enabling regulations that are sort of that can open up interstate, and VPPA I will talk a little bit more in detail, which can take any corporate to meet 100% RE in India. It is possible because the first two are already there, and the second two, with the pace that things are growing today, can be there. So basically, that's how we as a company are preparing for it, because you need utility and CNI skill sets to do the VPPs because these are larger power plants. Let's move forward. So basically now the challenge. So the challenge currently is that it is still sort of treated as a derivative contract. Okay, and but the intent of restricting derivatives long term back was basically they would be traded essentially. But essentially these are not tradable contracts. It's between developer and off taker. Okay, so just that it is derived from the exchange price. So a simple solution that we are proposing to the government and all, actually CERC can sort of issue a suo motu clarification to allow virtual PPAs and make it exempt as a derivative contract. So that's a simple thing that they can do. And CRC is actually, by the way, already started functioning. There was a period in which last year, 6 to 7 months, they were not functioning. So through another industry body, also we are also approaching the government and to take this forward. So and we can actually join hands, that is the corporates as well as us, to make this happen, because it's, I don't think so there is any better solution today to at least make meet really big targets. So there is the government side that we have to align to make this happen. The second area is the financial markets we have to align, because in India normally lenders do not like the merchant power plants. Technically this is almost like a merchant power plant, but it is backstopped by a contract. So the financing markets have to be opened up on the debt financing, because that's at least 75% of the capital cost of the project. Now, therein, we will need little bit of better terms from corporate off-takers like Amazon and other people that we talk to, because uh, the issue is that this is an innovative mechanism. If you have to make it happen in India, either a corporate buyer can also take a stake in the power plant, for example. Okay, because if suppose the allocation of capital was towards buying IRX, essentially if they are getting IRX literally for free, that same capital could be allocated to sort of put little bit of the equity, not majority, into the power plant. Then the lending market sees that the corporate buyer has skin in the game. If there's skin in the game, essentially it becomes sort of bankable. When it becomes bankable, it actually reduces the entire cost of the CFD contract. So it's a cycle. So I would also sort of urge the corporates also to work together, not as adversaries, essentially having very onerous contractual terms, because some of the terms that we see, then the thought process is that why should I take all the effort to do a contract for, let's say, three and a half rupees, when I can get a same contract with a normal long-term PPA selling physical power. So it's not worth the effort, essentially. So that's also me as well as most of the corporate generators feel, the RE generators feel. So the corporate buyers also have to understand the realities of financing these power plants in India, and should be looking at slightly terms which are more marketable terms as of today. Essentially, what are the basic terms in an NTPC contract or a SECI contract? So that is one. Second is a suo motu clarification of the CRC. And third, anyway, I mean, generators like us, we are sort of all sort of ready to go, because because you can always get connectivity for such power plants through the land route, by the way. And we have done that. So we've already got connectivity. So I think so this current year, we should hopefully see the first VPPAs coming through, if we are able to collaborate both the customer side as well as the government side. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pinaki. I think you closed it at a very good note. And that's exactly what we're trying to facilitate here, bringing together the CNI consumers and the buyers and developers like you together through Ready platform. And again, advocating and amplifying the concerns and voices of both these stakeholders and reaching out to the governments and the regulators and the ministries. Thank you very much. And we'll definitely take this offline as well and see how we can even intensify our push for advocating for the VPPAs. There are a couple of very interesting questions, rather, and I would quickly dive into some of the very important questions. I don't think we'll be able to take all, but let's see how many we can address. I'll read out the question, and either one of you can answer it. The first question here is, as a consumer, so there's a bit of a statement before the question. As a consumer, I keep paying utility the tariff and pay the contract for difference for the green attribute of a VPPA. So the utility tariff plus the contract for difference would be higher than the renewable price. Is it not a viable option to go for setting up a RE project instead? That's a question raised by Mr. Nitin Sabiki.
So can I answer that actually?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe Patrick, you can add up. So basically, our first effort is actually always to exhaust the physical deployment of RE. Okay, so when we talk to a customer, we look at the deployment of the, let's say, how many states they are. First is basically the lowest hanging fruit is the distributed generation that is within the factory. The next is intrastate open access. Okay, but then there is, we always see that after that at least 50% of the power you cannot replace through physical deployment of renewable energy. Now if that corporate has a sort of an overall goal, essentially to sort of meet some renewable energy targets, which is not only driven by economics, essentially, then they actually voluntarily buy IREX, okay, to meet that net zero goal. And that is where the VPPA comes in. So VPPA is the last plug that makes them fit the RE100 target without actually using that money to buy IREX into the international market. So that is what we see. It is, and it is some global customers like Amazon and all that we have seen have this kind of like a target. But a regular CNI customer is actually happy with only physical power. Yeah.
Thank you, Pinaki. Patrick, would you want to add something?
Yeah, I think one term that's used a lot by CNI buyers is additionality. So are we really changing the grid? Are we causing net new projects to come online? And so often the REC only type contract is either for an existing asset, something that's already been built, or it may not be enough for a developer to go and build a net new project. If you think about how much the REC is worth versus the physical power. And so usually the virtual power purchase is a contract where the buyer is paying for the bundled product. They're paying for the electricity to be sold into the grid, and they're paying to receive the environmental attribute. And so that unlocks the financing. So that's another reason, like Pinaki said, why physical power is the preference. You know, after that we can buy RECs, but it's always a cost additive position. You know, we're never going to break even. We're always going to be funding projects with an expensive REC, whereas we would rather use the virtual power purchase agreement to balance the cost benefit between finance, developer, and buyer.
Thank you, Patrick and Pinaki. So the next question is that I think you've already answered this. So I'm just reiterating that is the cost of REX included in fixed price of electricity, or the CNI buyer has to pay additional cost for the REX? I think
It's included. Yeah, it's usually a single price for the project output, which would include the power and the environmental attribute.
yes. Another question, again an interesting one. Who takes the solar evacuation risk in case of VPPA? That's one part of it, and another one is quite specific to the India regulation. Maybe Pinaki, you can take this. Is 26% group captive required in VPPA?
Okay. So the second question, this is not a group captive project essentially. This is a simple, actually it's a merchant power plant. It's a power plant that just creates electricity and then we sell it to the exchange essentially. Having said that, if the customer is free to invest in the power plant as an equity customer from a debt financing market standpoint, but regulation doesn't require them to create a group captive. But we have seen a variant actually, because with the opening up of interstate open access, and we've seen in I think even Patrick's company's case also, certain states where let's say your data centers are coming up. Now today, the within the state you cannot set up an open access power plant, but the interstate open access is opening up. So during the tenure of the VPPA contract, the project can be converted into interstate open access power plant where the physical power can also be supplied. So today, interstate has an issue, but tomorrow the corporate buyer can take 26% stake, convert it into a interstate open access group captive power plant, and buy physical power also. So that option is already there, but it is not required essentially. So that was the second question. The first one was what?
Who takes the solar evacuation risk in a VPPA?
So yeah, you want to say anything, Patrick? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the question is trying to understand what if the solar energy can't be sold into the grid? Like, what if the project's curtailed or offline? So usually the virtual power purchase agreement is an as generated contract, meaning that the buyer will buy all of the production that's liquidated into the market. And so if there's a constraint where the solar energy isn't being sold into the market, there is no transaction. And so the contract has various risk sharing mechanisms in it to provide incentive to the seller to keep the project operating at industry standard levels. And then on the other side, the buyer has to honor their fixed price for every unit that's sold into the grid.
Thank you.
Right, right. I mean, that's normally the case. And the other part of the evacuation is one is that's the dispatch risk, essentially. What you explained is correct. And as far as the evacuation in terms of the actual transmission connectivity and all, I mean, I'm not sure if that was also the question. See, today for getting connectivity to an ISTS project, ISTS substation, that is interstate transmission system, you have to either get a PPA with a discom or any of the central government entities, or you have to buy land and apply for connectivity. So currently, most of the developers, I mean, as a developer, you'll have to buy the land, take the risk, and apply for connectivity and get the connectivity, by the way. So that's something. Initial risk is taken also by the seller of power, but at the back of an assured contract from the corporate buyer. Otherwise, why should somebody buy land and get a connectivity? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both, Pinaki and Patrick. And as an extension to the last question, there is another one. What about the implication of the wheeling charges from the source of RE to the end user in VPPA?
So basically, I mean, because we are connected to the ISTS substation, certain charges are sort of, I mean, are lower. But at the end of the day, there are those charges. So basically, I mean, that is all taken into account. Essentially, we have a bus bar tariff, but the delivered power to the exchange at the periphery is adding up all those for example, 3 rupees 40 paisa, the number that I showed, is includes all those charges that come from our bus bar to the periphery at which the power is getting sold at the exchange. So that is added. For example, it could be 3 rupees at my bus bar, around 40 paisa could be just charges. So the CFD contract will talk about that 3 rupees 40 versus the BPPA price, essentially. Okay. But the model is that essentially any variation in the charges essentially is normally to the customer's account, as it is in the physical power contracts also, because we cannot take a regulatory risk in terms of the quantum of charges, because we have a fixed asset that is financed long term. It has to have a predictable revenue stream. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree that generally the buyer takes most of that risk. I will say in mature and liquid markets where power purchase agreements are done a lot, that basis risk, so the difference between the point of injection and the IEX, for example, including these charges, is usually borne by the seller. And as Pinaki said, it's part of the way the seller establishes the fixed price that the buyer agrees to pay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks again, both. And another one, how can power traders play a role in the VPPA contracts?
See, basically, I mean, in our model, we have our own power trading arm, but essentially, power trader will play a very important role. Is that to be able to sell that amount of power into the exchange every day, essentially. Okay. So there is a trader that you need to push that amount of power into the exchange. So that the power trader does play a role in between, essentially. But that's in the
Another
fixed margin. Yeah. Sorry.
and another role that power traders can play is risk management services. And so most corporate buyers don't have very large power trading desks, if they have one at all. And so sometimes industrials like chemicals and cement may have a power trader in their organization, but most do not. And so especially like a consumer brand wouldn't necessarily have that capability. So power traders can provide risk management and hedging products on top of the virtual power purchase agreement to reduce volatility to the C&I customer. Some are okay with full exposure to the market price, to the index, and some would prefer to have less volatility end up on their financial statements. And so that's another place power traders can provide services.
Yeah, and as far as India is concerned, not many traders actually take a position, essentially. Suppose I suppose I transact a VPP at a price X, and I essentially sort of choose a trader that come what may, this is the kind of price at which I will be selling you the power. Now we normally don't have traders who take a position; they will basically take a trading margin essentially. So it is more as a service. But yeah, what Patrick said, I mean, as an added product on that is also the, for example, the DSM, the charges are there. So certain very few traders actually provide a product in which they will take the risk of the DSM charges and give you a fixed number that can add to our sort of pricing in the contract. So that's an added service that they can provide essentially. And by the way, there is other things also that you need. For example, on a trading site like AMP has this entity called AMPEX in UK, where there's a dispatch engine for VPPs. So we can layer on the dispatch engine, because in terms of pushing that power into the trader, into the exchange, because most of the corporate buyers do not have the trading sort of platforms in place essentially to do this.
Right. Thanks for clarifying, Patrick and Pinaki. Another very important question, I think that's the crux of this session, where I think it's very important to explain how, and this question has come multiple times from different people. How is a VPPA different from buying green power from an exchange? That's one part of it. And another one is, how is a VPPA different from the current regular PPA that the CNI consumers sign? So I think there is still some lack of clarity here, and it'll be good to just reiterate what we've covered.
Do you want to start, Pinaki, and then I'll add?
No, why don't you start actually? I think since you're
Okay.
starting already, I will add.
Yeah, I think one key benefit versus the exchange model is that the buyer gets to negotiate on a specific project or specific portfolio of projects that meets their need, rather than kind of an aggregate product. And so having a very clear understanding of the project you're contracting, the risk, and some scenarios on what the future economics are likely to be, is a preference. It also allows buyers to build specific projects in specific locations with development partners. So I think there are two key differences, two key advantages. And what was the second option, Varun?
Yeah, how is it different from a regular PPA, the power purchase agreement? How is the PPA different from that? What are the advantages?
Yeah, so the V, or the virtual, really reflects the difference between receiving physical power, which is more common in a power purchase agreement, versus this pure financial commitment to the long-term offtake from the project, which is the virtual element. So we're not receiving physical power to our meter; we're still buying that via the utility, via the discom. And so it's a complementary mechanism, not a replacement.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, on the second question, essentially, just in the Indian context, so that people understand, when I sign a PPA, let's say, with a customer for a physical power plant, let's say within the factory I established, let's say rooftop project. Now I sign a PPA in which basically we are supplying the electricity directly to the customer there. Okay. In a VPPA, we are actually just selling the electricity into the grid through the exchange. We are not supplying the energy to the customer. We are only giving them the environmental attributes that the plant generates to the customer. And on the first part, why we see that customers actually prefer a VPPA mechanism compared to buying from the, let's say, the green power from the exchange, is that the price, essentially the price is sort of locked for a long term essentially. So they have a predictable sort of a long term price, because many of the customers, this is not their core business. Okay. So they don't want to sort of become a power trader and try to sort of maximize and minimize those things. So it just gives them a predictability over a long term. And given the pricing that is possible in India, it is could be a net at a zero number also, because the CFD on a long run average could be zero essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to build on that as well, I think that predictability is important to think about. So what's predictable is we know who our partner is, we know what the asset is that's producing renewable energy, and we can look at weather trends and analysis, engineering reports, and understand how much will this provide over time. The key risk that the customer is taking or the buyer is what will the power market do over time? And so what will that long-term strike price be? What will the long-term market price for energy be? And that's a key risk. And some corporates are very risk averse, and so virtual power purchase agreement is difficult for them to agree to. Because you're taking that long-term position. But as many of us, as Amazon thinks, we're buying from the wholesale market and we're selling power into the wholesale market from our PPAs. So over the long term, I agree with what Pinaki said, that our ideal scenario is we break even on both sides of that equation, but end up with more renewable energy than before. So there is definitely long-term uncertainty in the contract, but that's the price of those environmental attributes. Basically, we need to take on that uncertainty to allow the developer access to the capital to build the projects.
Pinaki, you're on mute.
Yeah, also the corporate actually in return gets a assured supply of RECs for a long term and a big volume. So they don't have to shop around for that. It's theirs essentially.
Thank you. I think I'm just conscious of the time. The questions, there are still some questions, but broadly we've covered most the essence of all of them. And I would again like to thank all of you, especially Pinaki and Patrick, for joining us today and sharing your experience and insights on this very important and crucial topic. That's the need of the hour. And thank you very much. We'll stay in touch. And for the participants, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar. And also we'll keep you posted about the advocacy efforts that are currently ongoing with the government. And I'd just like to mention that we were supposed to have a senior representative from MNRE today for this session, but since the parliament is in session, there were some changes and they couldn't join us. And they've requested us to share the recording of the session with them so that they can go through it. And also, in addition to the advocacy that we are doing, it will add value to building a stronger case for enabling VPPAs. And we'll be in touch with all of you. Thank you once again. Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Pinaki.
Thank you, WWF, for putting this thing together, and I hope the message also goes to MNRE. I mean, they're definitely a very important stakeholder, and thanks, Patrick, for a very interesting discussion and insight.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great questions.
Thank you. I'll be in touch offline. Thanks. Bye-bye. Have a good day.